Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Bringing Birmingham to You webinar. We're welcoming alumni and friends, and these events, of course, are designed to showcase the best of University of Birmingham's research and highlight the incredible impact that we're making with that research. The webinars are designed to be accessible, engaging, and welcoming. We try to avoid overly academic or technical language. Sometimes we can't help that, but we always try to explain it when it comes about. So you don't need any prior knowledge at all. All you need is your curiosity. So there's been a fantastic response to today's webinar. We've got over 600 of you registered to attend, and I think many of you are there. So hello and welcome. And we're very, very excited to have participants joining us from all around the globe. We've got people from more than 30 countries joining us now, from Japan, from Mexico, Egypt, New Zealand, Greece, and the UK. So let us know in the chat where you're calling from today. We'd really like to know. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so you can click continue when you've been prompted. That may have already happened, and only the speakers will ever be captured in that recording. As we get into the chat, you can submit your questions via the Q&A box, and actually you can do that already. And what we'll do is look at those and do our best to address them during the webinar. Now, all of you attendees, your cameras and your microphones will be disabled during the webinar. But if you want to ask your question live, I mean, I'm very happy to read it out for you. But if you'd like to pop up and actually ask a question of Richard or Kirsty, who are joining us, then you can indicate that when you submit your question, and we'll temporarily enable your microphone so you can actually ask your question yourself. And it would be lovely to hear from people. So feel free to use the chat function throughout the webinar. And let me now properly introduce the panel then. So we have Professor Kirsty Edgar with us, who is a professor in micropaleontology, and her work looks at how life on Earth and our climate have changed over millions of years. Her current work also focuses on discovering, communicating, and protecting important UK fossil heritage sites. So we'll discuss more about that. And we also have Professor Richard Butler, who's Professor of Paleobiology. He's a vertebrate paleontologist who works in the field in England, Scotland, Morocco, and Kyrgyzstan, seeking to make new discoveries that will illuminate the dark age of dinosaur evolution. And that is the Middle Jurassic, if you didn't know. So we're going to find out about the latest findings from Oxfordshire's Dinosaur Highway. We'll also have some research from Richard on Spica which is this new punk rock dinosaur discovered in modern day Morocco. So I'm going to hand over now to each of our panelists to properly introduce themselves, starting with Kirsty.
Hi, thanks, Alice. Do you want me to kick off with the talk?
Yes, please do.
Oh,
Yeah.
marvelous. Um, okay. So, do you have my full screen?
Yeah, we can see
Great.
that beautifully.
Perfect. Thank you. And so, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a sneak peek into some of the preliminary results that we have coming out from a project that I've been working on with Richard, and actually Alice has also been involved over the last couple of years. And this project looks to uncover how dinosaurs and their environment, what it looked like in Oxfordshire about 166 million years ago. And we're reconstructing this environment primarily using tracks or the footprints that they leave behind in the sediments that are then preserved in the rock record. So dinosaur tracks are really critical. Most of what we know about dinosaurs comes from the skeletal, the body fossil record that we're all very familiar with. But you only have one skeleton, but you will make many, many millions of footprints during your life. And so the chances of some of those being preserved in the fossil record is actually quite high. So the tracks that dinosaurs leave behind provide us with really key information that, one, we can't get from the skeletal record, but also that provides us with really a glimpse into a day in their life. So what we can figure out is we can understand aspects of their behavior. we can understand exactly where they were because the footprints form in the location where, the animal actually stepped. And they're often not moved very far, unlike body fossils, which can be sort of washed around or scavenged. We can figure out aspects of how they moved, what they were doing, what they looked like, but also how they were interacting with their environment and each other. We can figure out the kinds of environments they lived in and also the intervals of geological time, helping us to expand our understanding. And if you want to go and visit dinosaur track sites in the UK has a really good record of dinosaur research and discoveries, dating back more than 200 years to the naming of the very first dinosaur in the 1820s, Megalosaurus. And part of the reason we have such a good sort of record of dinosaurs in the UK is because we have lots of the right aged rocks from the late Triassic around 230 million years ago to around the late Cretaceous around 66 million years ago. And actually, we're very lucky that if you want to go and see dinosaur track sites in particular in the UK today, there are a number of coastal localities where you can literally just get out of the car and walk onto the beach. These are up in Scotland on the Isle of Skye, down in South Wales near Cardiff, North Yorkshire coast, but also extensively on the Isle of Wight and along the south coast of the UK. But today I'm going to be talking about one particular site that's very special. And the story starts in North Oxfordshire, that blue star in the centre of the UK, and it's a site known as Ardley Quarry. So back in the 1990s, a quarrying company, Smiths Bletchington, was extracting a rock called limestone that's made up of calcium carbonate or shelly or muddy material. And they were extracting the limestone for road fill, so to form the base of roads and things like the M40 in the UK. And these rocks date to the mid-Jurassic, around 166 million years ago. And whilst they were extracting these rocks, they found in one layer towards the base of the quarry all of these large impressions in the rock. And you can see some of those on the right-hand side. And this site, there were several hundred dinosaur tracks discovered. And actually, at the time, they were really quite groundbreaking and contributed really key new information to our understanding of not just UK ecosystems at the time, but actually helped fill gaps in our global understanding. Because of that scientific importance, that layer of rock in which the tracks were found was designated a site of special scientific interest. So all further quarrying as the site sort of moved around, they couldn't go through or beneath that layer, so it was preserved and any dinosaur tracks had to be reported. So fast forward more than 20 years, and we were very lucky that some new discoveries were made. These were by Gary Johnson, a quarry worker for Smiths Bletchington. He was removing a clay layer in his digger, and that was above this limestone layer we find the tracks in, and he kept hitting bumps. And he got out and looked, and he realised the bumps were in an order, and recognised that they were probably dinosaur tracks, given the history in the area. And this is when we started to get involved. So this is the team of people that I've been working with this project on. So that includes Richard, also from Birmingham, colleagues from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, Emma Nichols and Duncan Murdoch, that are curators there, and also Peter Falkingham, a footprint specialist from Liverpool John Moores University. And when we saw this site, when the finds were first reported, we recognised how special it potentially was, and also a really key opportunity because that 1990s site was in the quarry and it's inaccessible today because the land has been remediated, so it's been fully covered up. And of course, the techniques that we had to uncover ecosystem dynamics in the 1990s are very, very different to what we can do today. Anyway, so over the last 2 years in 2024 and 2025, we've spent 1 week each year with the quarry's support going in with a large team of volunteers to uncover the clay that overlays and infills these tracks to find out more about what there is there. And so we've had more than 200 volunteers from the universities of Birmingham and Oxford. And that's predominantly our undergraduate student body, as well as early career researchers from both of the institutions. And you can see a range of the kind of tasks and experiences that they're having at the site. Digging out the tracks, making casts, taking and recording measurements. And here's another overview. We're working in teams to uncover these very long trackways, which is one of the really unique features of this site compared to most of our coastal outcrops, which are very short. But perhaps the most important thing that we do at the site is we collect tens of thousands of photographs. We take high resolution images of every single footprint, and we also collect drone images of the whole site that will allow us to create 3D models that will stand for posterity, for scientific research, but also public engagement. So whatever the future of the site might be, we have this permanent record that can be used. Here's one of those drone overshots from our 2024 site that's roughly the size of 2 football pitches. And you can see these brushed clear areas which represent these trackways made up of lots of individual tracks. Here's that same surface, but this time sort of slightly 3D in terms of creating a depth map to pick out some of those tracks a little bit more obviously for you. I've now rotated that 2024 track to a north direction so I can show you relatively where our 2025 site was, which was just a little to the west. And I'm just going to flag 2 important features here. So we've excavated more than 450 dinosaur tracks across these 2 sites. And in the 2025 site on the left-hand side, you can see this very long north-south trending dinosaur trackway. And this comprises more than 100 tracks. It's more than 220 metres in length. And it is indeed one of the longest dinosaur trackways that we have in the Northern Hemisphere. So we have evidence for 2 types of dinosaur at this site. The vast majority of the dinosaur tracks that we find are very large. They're between about 70 centimetres and 100 centimetres in length. Many of them have this large displacement of mud at the front of the foot, which was pushed up as the foot went into the sediment. And these are made by a group of dinosaurs known as the sauropods, so these 4-legged herbivores with long tails and long necks, individuals around or up to about 16 metres in length. And these really dominate the track site, the tracks that we find. The second but much rarer type of tracks we find come from theropod or carnivorous dinosaurs. And we find evidence for things like claw marks within these. And so a likely track maker for this was probably something like a Megalosaurus, one of the apex predators of the Jurassic ecosystem. Something probably, or a much larger individual. So we're here talking about individuals about 10 to 12 metres in size. So just a quick few key findings. This is one of the largest UK dinosaur track sites, or is the largest UK dinosaur trackway that we've ever found when we take into account all of these pieces. It is one of the largest mapped sites in the world. And we have some of the longest trackways in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is a really interesting and sort of large site that has the potential to yield a huge amount of information. And what we can do is we can take the information from the tracks, from the rock unit that we find the tracks in, and from other fossils that we find at the site, like sea urchins, bivalves, and even some of the early crocodile ancestors. And we can reconstruct an environment, something like this. This is what North Oxfordshire would have looked like 166 million years ago. So think coastal lagoon, carbonate sandbanks, lovely warm subtropical temperatures, something like the Florida Keys today. And one of the reasons we have these tracks and we find them as geological record is because after they were made, they were very rapidly preserved and removed from exposure at the surface, possibly by something like a storm that infilled them very quickly. And if you'd like to find out more about the site, you can find out about our 2024 excavation, which Alice covered in Digging for Britain Season 12, Dinosaur Highway and Roman Sauna. But perhaps there's a lot of work still coming out that we're working on with our students to uncover more secrets from this site. But perhaps a career highlight was the cartoon that was made by Private Eye about the dinosaur track site discovery. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. And it was what a joy to actually be able to visit the site as well when you were working there and to show that on Digging for Britain. Those of you who are in the UK and have access to iPlayer, you can still see that programme on iPlayer and see Kirsty and Richard in action. And we've got people joining from all over the place. Thank you so much for sharing your locations in the chat. Somebody's actually on a train on its way to Nottingham. We've got somebody from Sutton Coldfield, somebody from Rugby, somebody from London, uh, Birmingham, people further afield. I spotted some more exotic locations, or at least exotic from the perspective of Birmingham as well. Lots of people watching with their families as well. So hello, kids, as well. I hope you're enjoying it. We've got people from Manchester, Lincolnshire, Perthshire, Bradford on Avon, and I did see some from. Yes, we've got somebody from Florida in the US joining, somebody from Lisbon, somebody a little bit closer to home in Solihull. Welcome to absolutely all of you. Hope you enjoyed Kirsty's talk about the Dinosaur Highway, and there's lots of questions coming in about that. Remember, you can put your questions into the chat. I know lots of you are, so that's great. But before we move on to that Q&A bit of the evening, Richard is going to tell us about Spike and Mealis. Over to you, Richard.
Oh, good evening, and thank you very much, Alice. It's a pleasure to join everybody this evening. I'll just try and share my screen.
Is it Spike and Mealis or Spike and Mellis, Richard?
Spike and Mellis.
Spike and Mellis. I must get that right.
Okay, have you got my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking tonight about this very strange dinosaur from rocks in Morocco. They're a very similar age to the rocks in Oxfordshire that Kirsty has just been talking about. And this dinosaur belongs to a group of dinosaurs called ankylosaurs. Ankylosaurs are these very heavily armoured, very squat, broad, plant-eating dinosaurs, sometimes described as tank-like or as looking like walking coffee tables is another description I've heard. But they're really interesting and iconic group of dinosaurs. And one of the things they're famous for is that some of the latest ankylosaurs from the latest part of dinosaur evolution have these really iconic tail clubs. So these bony clubs at the end of their tails, which they may have used for fighting with one another. They are one of a number of groups of armoured dinosaurs, so dinosaurs that have some kind of bony armour in their skin. The other really famous group are the stegosaurs, and they're the closest relatives of the ankylosaurs. And then we also have some other early armoured dinosaurs, such as an animal called Scelidosaurus, shown at the bottom right of the screen here, which is actually from Dorset in the UK and is perhaps one of the oldest members of this group. Now, ankylosaurs, we have a really good fossil record of them during the latter part of their evolutionary history from some parts of the world. And so this map of the world, hopefully you can see the dots. Really the key point here is that those dots show where we have ankylosaur fossils from. They're almost all in the northern hemisphere. So we have quite a lot of ankylosaur fossils from Asia, from North America and from Europe. But you'll see almost no dots in the southern hemisphere. So Africa, South America, Australia, we have very, very few occurrences of the group. And if we look at their kind of record through time, so this is a plot shows time going along the bottom axis from the Jurassic into the Cretaceous from about 180 to about 65 million years ago. And the two lines on there, which hopefully you can make out, show the diversity of stegosaurs and ankylosaurs through time. And the key point here is that we really have very, very few ankylosaurs from the Jurassic period. Almost everything we know about ankylosaur evolution comes from the Cretaceous. But if we want to understand why this group became successful, then we need to look right down at the start of their evolutionary history in the Jurassic. So we have very few ankylosaurs from the southern hemisphere and very few from the Jurassic. And it's sort of a big gap in our understanding of dinosaur evolution. And so this started to change a few years back. And this was really work that started by my colleague Susie Maidment, who's a dinosaur researcher at the Natural History Museum. She's also an honorary professor here at the University of Birmingham. And the Natural History Museum were sent images of the fossil you can see on the right of the screen here. This is about 10 years ago. And this was actually for sale in a fossil shop in Cambridge. And they didn't really know what it was. It's clearly a bone. It's clearly got some very strange spikes on it. But it was very mysterious. So the museum decided to acquire it and to study this. And actually, the information that the specimen had with it was that it came from Morocco. It came from somewhere called Boulamain in the Middle Jurassic rocks in Morocco, but really nothing else apart from that. So no precise locality information. And what Susie was able to do was to trace the fossil back through a commercial supply chain and actually find the precise locality at which it had been collected, which is in the Middle Atlas Mountains. This is a view of the site, so you can see these red rocks exposed in this quite dry desert landscape. And it's those rocks from which this fossil had come. Susie and colleagues were also able to study this fossil using CT scanning. And they were able to establish that what it actually was a very incomplete rib which had a fused piece of armour attached to it. So the blue is the fused armour with the big spike on it, and the grey colour here is the rib. And these have been digitally separated from one another following CT scanning. So using radiographic techniques to look inside the bone itself. So this is a really unusual looking rib. So we've never found any animal alive or extinct other than this that has armour fused to its ribs. Normally armour, when it's present, is sort of embedded in the skin. It doesn't attach to the underlying bones of the skeleton, and it certainly doesn't attach to ribs. So this was very distinctive, very unusual, but that was all we knew of this animal. It was enough to describe it as a new type of dinosaur, and Susie and her colleagues suspected that it might be an ankylosaur, but not everybody was convinced by that. This is a reconstruction that an artist did at the time, and it shows Spicomelis as an armoured dinosaur with ribs, with these spikes coming out of the rib cage. But really, other than the spikes coming out of the ribs, really a very standard looking type of ankylosaur, nothing particularly unusual. So I work very closely with Susan. We decided that we wanted to go and try and find more of this material. So we put together a team of paleontologists from the University of Birmingham, from the Natural History Museum, and also colleagues from North America, collaborating with colleagues from University in Fez. And we went out in 2024 to try and excavate more of the skeleton of Spicomelis. Went back to the site. When we got there, we met the gentleman on the left here. This is Mohammed, a local farmer who lives basically on the site. So his house was a few hundred meters away from the area in which Spicomelis had been discovered. And in the time that in the meantime, he had collected fossil material from the site. And some of that is shown on the right here. You can probably make out some really remarkable looking fossils there, things with very large spikes on them. So this was an incredibly exciting moment when we got to the site and Mohammed laid all of this fossil material out on this carpet outside his house. And we were really, kind of completely blown away by what we could see there. Lots of it was stuff that we couldn't interpret, actually. We had never seen anything like it in dinosaurs before. So with the Moroccan team, we spent a week or so digging up more of the skeleton of this animal, a lot of time in quite hot weather, removing overburden, so removing the rocks overlying the quarry and then doing the fine work of digging down to the bones themselves. And then we took them back to Fez. And one of the challenges of working in Morocco is that paleontology is quite a new area of research in Morocco. So there aren't many paleontologists working in country. There aren't really any museums that can hold fossil collections, and there's very limited infrastructure within the universities. So one of the things we had to do to work on this material was to actually set up a lab at the university in Fez. So what these images show here is when we were out in early 2025, basically helping our Moroccan colleagues to establish a fossil preparation lab at the university. So on the left, that's us buying an air compressor. An air compressor is something you need to power the tools that you use to remove the rock from around the bone. And then on the right, we've got our fossil preparation setup. So we spent a week in Morocco in early 2025 setting up this lab that would allow us to prepare these fossils so that they could be studied and then put into what we're developing as a new museum at the university in Fez. So we spent that week removing rock from around the bones. On the left, one of our colleagues, Ahmed, is doing some of that very dirty, difficult fossil preparation work. We were actually able to send Ahmed and Kauta, who's shown in the image on the right, to Egypt using some funding that we had in order that they could get professionally trained in how to do this at one of our colleagues' research groups in Egypt. And then we spent the rest of that week after we'd done the preparation of the fossils, studying those so that we could complete a scientific description of them. And so by the end of that week in Morocco, in early 2025, we had a much better understanding of the skeleton of this animal. So these images show some of the bones that we'd laid out in the lab in Morocco. On the left-hand side, you can see lots of the individual parts of the armour that we had prepared and were studying during that week. And on the right-hand side, you can see a series of ribs from this animal. And these ribs show that every single rib along the body, along the neck and the back region of the body, had these very long spikes along them. Completely unusual, completely unlike anything we've ever seen before in dinosaurs or in any other animal alive or extinct. So we had a much better picture by the end of that week of what this animal looked like. And that allowed us to prepare a scientific description. So this is a figure from the paper that we published last year, and I'll just talk through a few of the things that are shown on this screen. So you've got one of these very spiky ribs at the top in the centre, they have between 5 to 6 of these large spikes coming out of them. We've got other bits of armour. So in the kind of the middle part of the screen on the right, you can see this kind of compound armour with these 2 spikes coming out of it. One of those, although it's broken at its tip, is a very long spike. We can also see at the bottom left some very, very long spikes which may have been positioned on the shoulders or around the neck. And then in the image at the bottom in the middle shows this really bizarre piece of armour that we had no idea what it was when we first saw it. So we eventually figured out that this is probably kind of a ring of armour that would have fitted around the neck of this animal. And that's something we see in other ankylosaurs. They have what are known as cervical rings, kind of rings of armour around the neck region. But what's particularly exciting and bizarre about this one is that the length of the spikes that come out of this. So in other ankylosaurs, these armour rings around the neck region, they're quite simple, they're not very interesting to look at. This animal has spikes that are almost a metre in length coming out of that ring of armour around its neck. So spikes the length of golf clubs coming out of the neck region. And we actually think there was more than a single row of these spikes coming out of the neck region. We have lots of other types of armour, so we have big spikes in the pelvic region. We also found something that we didn't expect at all, and that's shown at the top left of the screen, and it's probably difficult to tell what you're looking at there, but what it actually is 2 tail vertebrae that are fused together, and those are from the very end of the tail, and the fact that they're fused together suggests that this animal had some sort of weapon at the end of its tail. So maybe it had a tail club, like in much later ankylosaurs. That's something we didn't think evolved until much later in ankylosaur evolution. Or maybe it had spikes at the end of its tail, which is something we see in stegosaurs, close relatives of ankylosaurs. So certainly, we're pretty certain there was some sort of tail weapon, which absolutely we would not have predicted this early in ankylosaur evolution. So this allowed us to create a much more complete reconstruction of what this animal might have looked like. This is a video, so hopefully you can see that rotating. This was created for us by a paleoartist called Matt Dempsey. We often get asked if this is an AI reconstruction, and it's not. It's the result of really incredibly painstaking work that Matt did to put our sketches together into a realistic reconstruction of what this animal might have looked like. And you can see, if I just rotate it again, these incredible spikes coming out of the neck region. Really just ridiculously long compared to the overall size of the animal. You can see these big spikes over the hip region. You can see all the spikes coming out of the rib cage along the back. And then we've got spikes potentially forming that tail weapon at the end of the tail. So there's a number of things here that are really unusual and unexpected, particularly when you consider this is the oldest ankylosaur that we know of. So this is from the Middle Jurassic. It's right down at the base of when we think ankylosaurs evolved. And if you ask me what I thought would have predicted an early ankylosaur would have looked like, I would have said it would have looked very simple and that they would have got more complex. They would have developed more complicated armour, more exciting armour through their evolution. And actually this is completely the reverse. This is the most bizarre armour that we see in any ankylosaur. It's really the most bizarre armour that we find in any dinosaur or pretty much any animal that I can think of. So just an incredibly exciting animal to work on. Sorry. So we published a paper on this in the late summer last year. And it was immediately dubbed by the media the punk rock dinosaur. I'm rather ashamed, actually, that this isn't a tagline that we came up with. It's something that the BBC came up with and encouraged us to use. And it really took off as a kind of a moniker for the dinosaur, and it's something that we've been using ever since. One of the things I enjoyed about the BBC News story, though, was that Palab Ghosh, who wrote the story, felt the need in the second or third paragraph of the story to explain to readers what punk rock was. So to explain that this was a style of music from the 70s. But clearly it's riffing on the idea of punk rock fans wearing those spiky collars. This has also inspired some very interesting and exciting paleo art. So these are some images that I've pulled off the web. One of the wonderful things about describing dinosaurs is the minute you describe a new dinosaur, there's instantly a whole community of artists out there who are creating life reconstructions of what that animal might look like, including this rather grisly and I think extremely speculative example on the left here of a Spicomelis carrying the dismembered parts of its predators. But I think this does raise the question of what the function of these spines were. So classically, we think of the spines of ankylosaurs, the armour of ankylosaurs, as being primarily for protection against predators. And that almost certainly was the case here for Spicomelis. But I don't think that metre-long spikes around your neck are actually necessary to protect you from predators. It's probably overkill. And actually, they probably would have caused you some issues. I mean, imagine this thing trying to wander and make its way through vegetation, through thickly vegetated woodlands or whatever. So we suggested that perhaps there is another function for this armour, this very bizarre armour in Spicomelis. Perhaps it's related to displaying to other members of the same species, or perhaps to scaring off predators rather than necessarily actually just protecting it against the bites of those predators. One of the challenges that we face working in Morocco, and this is very much an ongoing project, I'm actually off to Morocco tomorrow to hopefully dig up more of Spicomelis, is that there's a huge commercial trade in fossils. And the images I'm showing on the screen here are images I've pulled off Facebook showing fossils from the site that are being actually illegally excavated and sold in most cases outside of Morocco, so to other parts of the world, to private fossil collectors. And so this is a real challenge because if we're going back to work at that site, but we don't actually know how much of the quarry at which we're going to work will still be there, because these commercial fossil collectors are illegally collecting fossils at the site. And I think there's obviously this complicated picture, because that is also quite an important component of the local economy in parts of Morocco. And so it's actually, it is driving a lot of local economic growth and activity through selling fossils, but we lose huge amounts of scientific information when fossils are sold in this way. And this is just another example of fossils probably from the same site being sold on a European website, and in many cases these are selling for up to as much as tens of thousands of pounds for individual bones. So it's a challenge that we're working with. We're working very closely with our Moroccan collaborators on how we might address this. One of the things we're very keen to do is to work with the local communities in the Middle Atlas to look at how the site and the wider region could be developed for things like geotourism and education, to help develop a kind of a sense, a community sense of um, uh, ownership for the site and the wider fossils that come from the Middle Atlas, and also hope to generate economic growth in the region through geotourism, through bringing people in to visit the site. So this is Susie talking at a conference that we both attended in Fez back in October, which is very much driven by the Moroccans, and it was about the concept of setting up what's called a geopark, a protected area in the Middle Atlas that will allow us to protect the site, but also use it for the benefit of local communities. So that's where we're going with the project. It's very much about making further scientific discoveries, but it's also very much about trying to build scientific capacity in Morocco. So training a new generation of paleontologists, creating new museum displays there, creating museum collections, and also working with local communities to empower them to value their local heritage and also to use it for economic benefit within the region. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Richard, that's just amazing. Thank you very much. What an amazingly cool dinosaur. There's so many people in the chat, going, it's so cool, it's so amazing. How brilliant to find something new. And I think, I'm not a paleontologist. I'm a human anatomist, but I have this interest in general vertebrate biology and how amazing to find something which tells us something new about bone. That you've got these accoutrements, you've got these spikes that are attached to ribs in a way we've never seen that before, as you say, in any other animal. And so that's not just telling us something about this particular dinosaur, that's telling us something about the way that bone works much more broadly. I absolutely love that. Now, I had several questions that I wanted to ask you too, but I might have to shelve them for now and ask you at a later date because we have been inundated with questions this evening, and we're going to try and get through most of them. I think I'm going to start with Nathaniel, and if he's there, Nathaniel would like to ask his question live. He would
What
quite,
is everybody's favorite dinosaur?
isn't it just Spiker Mellis now? What a brilliant question, Richard. Is it is it Spiker Mellis?
Oh,
It's a very boring answer, but yes, yes, Alice, it is now. It didn't used to be. So my answer used to be a very small dinosaur, actually called Frutodens, which is one of the smallest plant-eating dinosaurs we know of, and a dinosaur I was involved in describing almost 2 decades ago now. But it is now Spicomelis because it's just so cool. It's so different from anything I ever thought I'd be involved in discovering. So yeah, I mean it's that for that
That's
reason,
really, really
Spicomelis has to be the
amazing.
choice.
Here's a great question from Hasnain. Have you discovered any fossils of dinosaurs which just shouldn't have been in the location where they've been found? Or have you found dinosaurs in locations which have changed the entire perspective of dinosaurs? What a great question.
So I think dinosaurs lived on land. So we normally find dinosaurs in rocks that formed on land, and that's where we find probably more than 95% of dinosaur species specimens and dinosaur species. But we do occasionally find dinosaur fossils in places you wouldn't expect them to be. So in rocks that actually were deposited out at sea, and that's because they died and were washed out. So there's some great examples of this from the UK. So I showed an image of Scelidosaurus in my talk, and that's from Dorset, and it's found in marine rocks. So it's not an animal; it's an animal that lived in the sea, but it was washed out after it died.
Mm.
So we do find them in places you wouldn't predict that you should find dinosaurs, and also we find them in some very strange places. So I mean, dinosaur fossils have been dragged up from the bottom of the North Sea. They've been found in boreholes. I was involved in some dinosaur fossils described from Serbia last year, and they were found basically in a graveyard in Serbia, at the edge of the graveyard. So places you wouldn't totally not predict to find dinosaur fossils.
And then, is there anything to say about the kind of locations of them back then that, you find them in interesting locations today? But do you ever find dinosaurs in an environment, I suppose, that surprises you, that you think, oh, actually, I hadn't expected to find a dinosaur in this arid an environment or this lush an environment?
I think one of the things we're learning about dinosaurs is that they live basically everywhere on land. So if we find rocks of the right age and they're capable of preserving fossils, there's going to be dinosaur fossils in them.
Right.
So we have rocks for that are formed in deserts. We have rocks that formed in swampy environments, in kind of environments not too dissimilar to where we are today. If you're in Birmingham, the landscape, different kinds of plants, but it would look similar in terms of the climate and so on. And we basically they lived everywhere. We have them right up into the Arctic Circle. So they were incredibly successful and able to colonize all sorts of different environments on land.
Yeah, and also don't forget if the big rock that fell out of the sky 66 million years ago hadn't wiped them out, I don't think mammals would have got a look in, and we wouldn't be here today. It's amazing, isn't it, to think that there is that kind of contingency and serendipity in evolution. Here's a great question. So I'll come to you, Richard. How can members of the public get involved with excavations or with research publications? Is that possible?
There aren't that many opportunities in the UK for people to get involved in excavations, unfortunately. So it's something that we offer to our students, but it's quite difficult because of the nature of the site where we do that, which the site that Kirsty was talking about. It's an active working quarry. We're very limited on the number of people that we can take in. So, and we have to be very mindful of health and safety considerations and so on. So that we have to restrict that site really to members of the university. So very much, students are very much involved. There are opportunities, certainly to go out and look for dinosaur fossils in the UK. The Isle of Wight is a great place to go. The local museum there, Dinosaur Isle Museum, will, run activities. They'll do dinosaur walks and so on. So there's certainly places you can go and look for dinosaur fossils. It's quite difficult in the UK. In other parts of the world, so if you're joining from somewhere like North America, it's more common, I would say, because there's more opportunities to dig for dinosaurs, for there to be excavations in which the public can participate. So if you're in the American West, I mean, there's lots of opportunities usually for members of the public to go and join excavations. But it's a bit challenging in the UK. So, if you're interested, I would encourage you to visit somewhere like the Isle of Wight, where you can go and look for fossils. Isle of Skye, if you're up in Scotland, is a great place to go and look for dinosaur footprints along the coastline there. I think you're on mute, Alice.
Are there rules, Richard, about best practice, where you can pick up fossils from? Because obviously we've seen in your talk that there are some issues with really important sites like your site in Morocco being plundered. How can people be responsible when they're fossil collecting?
Yeah, it's very different in different parts of the world. So the exact rules on whether you can or cannot collect fossils are very different. So I can't give an answer that covers everywhere. I think you need to, if you're unsure, I would suggest speaking to local museums or looking at your local museum websites. They might have information. In the UK, you can collect fossils pretty much anywhere along the coastline. And so it's very popular, obviously, to go to places like Dorset and collect fossils. And if those fossils are loose on the coastline, then generally you're able to take those home yourself. Obviously, if they're scientifically significant, we would encourage people to take those to a local museum and get somebody who's an expert to look at those. And other parts of the world, so the situation is slightly different in Scotland. You can't collect fossils necessarily in the same way. There is a national fossil collecting code which governs where and where you are able to collect fossils versus where you can't. So it's very patchy. It's very different in different places. So I think I'd encourage people to understand. Usually via local museums are a really good place to start with this. To understand what it's like in the area in which you live, if you're interested in going out and collecting fossils.
Thank you very much. I think Kirsty's back with us, and we've got a great question about small fossils, Kirsty. So, one of our attendees said they'd love to hear more about some of the smaller fossils at the same location. You mentioned bivalves. Are there any other plants or small animals preserved there?
Yeah, well, hopefully it's fourth time lucky back and you're to help me here. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I guess it's very easy to get distracted by the big fossils, but as soon as you start looking very closely at the small stuff, there's a huge amount of hidden diversity. So at the site in the limestone, we find evidence for the burrowing of shrimp and worms. which would have been in very shallow pools of water. We find lots of echinoids, spines. We find a lot of different types of bivalves, including as little clusters, as if they little patch reefs that have developed. But actually, one of the projects that we're going to be working on over the next year is to start sifting the sediment to try and extract things like we found evidence as we've gone through of teeth from, I think it was early crocodilomorphs. We also found a jaw last year. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that tells us about those smaller animals that were present in the ecosystem. So we can get both the vertebrates and the invertebrates. But yes, it's very much a future project. So watch this space.
Yeah, it's fantastic because I mean it just shows you what the whole ecosystem was like as well, doesn't it? So it tells you about
Fills
those
out the
smaller
picture.
animals. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it also tells you what the dinosaurs were walking alongside. So we've got quite a lot of questions about Spicomelus. I might come back to that. A lot of questions about the spikes, actually. People are really, really fascinated by these spikes. I mean, they are very, very curious. A lot of people are asking about whether they were covered in skin or some kind of other soft tissue, maybe something like keratin that obviously we've got in our fingernails. Do we have any idea about that at all, Richard? About the what the relationship between the bone that you've got and the soft tissue might have been?
Yeah, so they would have been covered by keratin, exactly as you say. So actually, the spikes would have been even longer than we see just from the bone. So we're just seeing part of what the whole structure in the animal would have looked like.
How do you know they're covered in keratin?
So you can see when they're really well preserved, you can actually see kind of grooves and where blood vessels would have lain over the surface of these. You can see kind of where that would have attached. So there's good evidence, and we have modern animals that have armor as well. So things like crocodilians and so on. So we can also make comparisons to the animals we see in ecosystems today.
And Sebastian, age 6, wants to know how many spikes did Spicomelus have? That's a
Well,
great pub quiz
that's a
question, isn't
it's a
it?
great question. I mean, lots. I don't know the answer. Part of the reason I can't give you an answer is although I showed you a beautiful, complete reconstruction, it is, there's still a lot of detective work in that reconstruction. So we have quite a lot of the skeleton. We certainly don't have anywhere near all of it, and we're making educated guesses about where some of those spikes go on the body. So what we're hoping to do, and this is why we're going back to Morocco over the next couple of weeks, is find much more of it, so we can build up a much more complete picture. I suspect it's going to be even weirder than we've reconstructed it when we have even more of the skeleton. And so maybe in a couple of years' time, I'll be able to answer exactly how many spikes, but hundreds of spikes for sure.
And when you go out to Morocco, Richard, will you be sharing your findings as they emerge? Because I think that's really, really exciting. And I've already shared tonight in the chat the university's Facebook page where you've been talking a bit more about Spicomelus. Will you be doing a bit of social media when you're out there so that we can actually see what you're finding when you're finding it?
Yeah, we do tend to post so we're usually posting on Blue Sky or possibly LinkedIn when we're in the field.
Yeah.
So I expect we'll do some posts from the field. There's some great videos. So when we went out a few years back, the Natural History Museum sent a film crew of us, and there's a wonderful video that the Natural History Museum created on YouTube, showing the discoveries from the Natural History Museum and Birmingham team. So also encourage people to have a look at that.
Brilliant, thank you. Kirsty, there's an interesting question here about the paleontologists themselves and about where you're digging. Thinking about Morocco versus Oxfordshire, is it easier to dig in warmer versus colder environments? And whereabouts are fossils best preserved?
Okay, well, I'll tackle the easier to dig question first. I think that very much depends on the weather you enjoy the most. And also, so what we found in Oxfordshire is on a very hot sunny day, it's lovely, but the ground over the course of the week we were working became like concrete because it dried out. So the digging got harder and harder the longer it was hot. So if you want easy digging in the UK, it's actually better to dig in the rain, but it's perhaps a little bit less enjoyable. Do you want to add to that, Richard?
Well, I mean, you can see I've got red hair, so I'm very sensitive to the sun. So, I mean, we tend to find fossils in very hot places, which is not ideal from my perspective. So, I quite like a bit of UK field work with cloud cover.
And there's a question here about protection of particular discoveries, and the prints in particular, there's a lot of housing and business development planned for the Ardley area. Has the area where the prints have been found been protected to keep that limestone layer, or is it that these prints are going to be lost? Is it the fact that you're kind of going in and recording them, but inevitably they're going to be lost? What's the future for that site?
So the layer of limestone in which the tracks are on the top, that can never be removed. That's going to be preserved. Um, the at the moment, the plan very much is that it will be covered with geotextiles, and then the land will be remediated, for various purposes, whether it's farming and things like that. So they will never be destroyed. They will always be there beneath the ground, just like the tracks from the 1990s. But I think very much the enthusiasm with which the tracks were taken and the public engaged with them around the world, very much a live conversation about beyond just the digital models that we have that we can make freely available. Can we also open up parts of the site longer term? But at the moment, it is a live quarry and will be so for the foreseeable future. So unfortunately, currently no public access. But again, who knows what we'll be able to achieve over the next few years.
That's really interesting because I think that feeds into the importance of sharing your research as well and sharing your discoveries to a wide audience, because then we learn what people find valuable.
Mm.
And if people generally think this is valuable and want to preserve it, then we can start looking at ways of doing that.
Yeah.
We've got so many questions here. They're all brilliant. So my son Toby, that's not my son Toby, but Phoebe's son Toby, would like to know which dinosaur species would have hunted or might have hunted Spicomelus. Richard, what big predators would have been around in the same environment that would have taken that on? I mean, it's very spiky. You can just get a mouthful of spikes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like something that would be a very tempting snack for a predator, does it? We are working in the rocks that Spicomelus comes from, looking at all of the dinosaurs. So we've got other dinosaur discoveries from the same rocks. As of yet, we don't really have a good understanding of what the predators in that ecosystem looked like. Maybe we'll find some more this year. We do have some large teeth that show that there definitely were large predatory dinosaurs in that ecosystem. Kirsty showed an image of a dinosaur called Megalosaurus from the Middle Jurassic of the UK. Probably there would have been very similar sorts of dinosaurs to Megalosaurus living in Morocco, because the rocks they're not that far away. They're about the same age. So I think a dinosaur like Megalosaurus, a big predatory bipedal animal walking on two legs, up to maybe 10 meters in length, that's probably the sort of animal that Spicomelus would have had to deal with.
You'd have had to turn him over first, I think, to have a good go at him. You wouldn't. Yeah, he's.
Well, some of
I
these
mean, he's almost
ankylosaurs have
impregnable.
armor on the bottom of their. We don't know if this is true in Spicomelus, but they're all covered all over in armor.
Yeah,
So
yeah, amazing. There's a whole series of questions that have come in about people who are really, really interested in paleontology as a career and paleontology at the University of Birmingham as well. Somebody who's 4 years old, or somebody who's asking on the behalf of a 4-year-old, says, "What's the best route to becoming a paleontologist?" But also, how can people learn more about the paleontology courses that are available, and particularly at the University of Birmingham? And how are the students you've currently got involved in all of this field work as well? So, a bunch of questions there about careers in paleontology. Kirsty, would you like to start with that one?
Okay, I'll start with the last question, which was how are the students involved? So at the University of Birmingham, we do have a bespoke, one of the few in the country, bespoke paleontology and geology programs. And our students become involved. We run field courses that are part of their program. So for example, this year we'll be going to Canada to work out in Alberta with them on a live dig. But actually, they become involved with our research through their third and fourth year projects in particular, where they have to undertake a piece of, essentially scientific work. And so this year, for example, at Dewars Farm, we have two different students. One's going to be working on recording the dinosaur tracks as we find them and building 3D models. And the other one will be working on trying to find different ways we might conserve the track surface if we opened it up to the public longer term. So I think lots of opportunities also through volunteering in the labs and the Lapworth Museum as well.
Brilliant. And if people are really interested in paleontology, if they're starting at age 4, Richard, what should they be doing? And then what kind of courses could they look forward to studying when they get into higher education?
Yeah, so I think if you're starting young, just learn as much as possible about paleontology. So there's lots of great books out there that are suitable for all kinds of different levels of interest and prior knowledge of the subject. There's lots of great places in the UK and all over the world to go and look for fossils. Dorset, Isle of Skye, Isle of Wight, lots and lots of places. Pretty much anywhere you are, there's going to be fossils locally that you can go and find. Your local museum, great place to go and understand more about fossils. So many local museums will have fossil displays, and they'll have paleontologists who will run events around fossils. So there's lots of ways to get engaged. I think if you're interested in becoming a paleontologist, it's really just about studying science. We tend to have quite broad scientific base as paleontologists because our subject is a mix of geology and biology, and those subjects themselves. There's a lot of neither Kirsty or myself are mathematicians, but you have to study a little bit of maths to do paleontology. So I think just having a good base in science and maths is important. Then studying something like either paleontology or geology or biology at university is usually the first route in, and then after that, people will go on to specialist masters or PhD programs.
Brilliant. Yeah, do you want to add something there,
I was
Kirsty?
just going to add that if you're not quite at university level yet and you did want to find out more, there are a lot of free online courses, particularly through places like Coursera, that you can learn more about different types of ancient ecosystems. And also PBS Eons do amazing mini 5-minute videos